All right. The bad news is there's no school on Friday, which I didn't realize till today. Which means, I don't know, we got to figure this out.
Test on Thursday.
I'll let you know Wednesday if we're having a test on Thursday. There's a lot to cover this week. A lot to cover. All right, this is where we left off on Friday, talking about the float chamber of the carburetor. The float chamber is a very important piece of the carburetor. It acts as a reservoir for the fuel to come in, which is fine, but more importantly is you have floats in there that will set the height of the fuel. And the height of the fuel in the float chamber is equated to how high it goes across into the discharge nozzle. And if the fuel level is too high, then that venturi suction that's pulling out fuel from the discharge nozzle, that little bit of suction draws way more fuel than it should have. So the engine now runs super rich. And which would be fine if you could adjust it with the mixture control, but you can't because you have students and pilots who are told, don't touch that. So it's just going to run super rich. Or if that float level was set and it's just a little bit too low, then it's a little bit too low in the discharge nozzle, and the suction that's formed in the venturi that's supposed to take out just the right amount of fuel, it doesn't. It doesn't get enough fuel, so the engine now runs lean. It runs lean. So it's very important. Let's see. So the fuel does enter the float chamber from the fuel supply. If it's a gravity-fed system, high-wing aircraft, you're talking about 3 to 5 psi of head pressure. If it's a pressure system, low wing, I think 20 is way too high. It's more like 5 to 7, 5 to 8, I think. But that's what the thing that I read said, so we'll go with that. All right. This is a big one, and I don't like it. Fuel metering force. So we're always going to have our air metering force and fuel metering force. Well, the thing I don't like about these little carburetors is fuel metering force is the difference between two different air pressures. When we get into pressure carbs, fuel metering force is difference between fuel pressures, which would make a lot more sense. But in this case, fuel metering force is the difference between air pressure in the float bowl and the air pressure in the venturi. Air pressure equals fuel metering force. And it sounds stupid, but there's an obvious logical thing behind it, which we've already talked about. If you put pressure on the fuel in the float bowl, so let's say we had a little vent on top and we decided, we're going to take a little tube and we're going to put it on that little vent. We're going to take it up, we're going to put it forward into the wind like a pitot tube. Then air is going to go in and force down. It's going to press down on that fuel. And even if you didn't have venturi suction, it's going to blow all the fuel out. So it's going to run super rich. Conversely, if we took that little tube and we put it somewhere where there's a low pressure and caused a low pressure in the fuel bowl, then we get low pressure vacuum in the venturi and low pressure vacuum in the float bowl, you will get no fuel flow. So that's why fuel metering force is the difference between the two airs. So difference between well, hang on. That's not what I wrote. The difference in air pressure, I like that better, in air pressure from float bowl to the venturi. So yes, fuel metering force is actually air. Let's take a look. You know what I usually do? Let me see. See if I can pull this off. Since I got this, let's see. So this looks like just a little Stromburg carburetor. And I took this video while it was running on the ground power unit. So watch what's happening. This is the throttle valve, the gold colored part right here. And this is the main discharge nozzle, so we're looking up at it. And you can see that it runs and nothing is coming out of the main discharge nozzle. So what circuit are we on?
Idle.
Idle. And then you can see it start to transition. So some will be coming out of the idle circuit, which you can't see because it's above the butterfly valve. And then some will start coming out of the main discharge nozzle. And so it's faster. So right there, it's idling. I did not mean to do that. So right there, I don't know, just by the sound, it's probably running about 1,500 RPM. You can see there's not a lot of daylight here. I mean, it's not open very far. Dang it. I guess if that isn't showing, it's just going to screw me up. And then, I won't do that. Fuel, 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 fuel. And you can see it's going to start shutting down and go off into its, what circuit?
Idle.
Idle circuit. All right.
Question.
Yes?
What was the purpose of the small hole in the butterfly valve? Is that part of the idle circuit?
Well, nobody knows. The people that do know are dead, and they never told me. My assumption is that there isn't quite enough air getting through, and this is all the way closed, so they added that little hole just for a little bit more air. My assumption.
Equalization of pressure.
No, you definitely don't want to equalize pressure. You want suction on the top of that, and you want high pressure down here.
Because if it was equal, nothing would happen.
Yeah. Yeah. We need... What's that? Volume, yeah, add a little more volume of air. All right, let me see what we got here. Fuel metering head. I don't know what the hell this is about. We can use it for something else. Air pressure, difference between air pressure on top of this float and the air pressure right here in the Venturi is called?
Fuel metering force.
Fuel metering force. All right. I don't use that term fuel metering head, but it's what they're saying is that space right there is the difference between the fuel level and the discharge nozzle. Notice that that's the main metering jet. Main metering jet, which if I haven't already gotten to, I will in a minute. That is an orifice, calibrated orifice, that controls the amount of fuel that will flow at wide open throttle. It differentiates between unmetered fuel and metered. So every time you get after that, it is metered fuel. Before it, it's unmetered. Ah, I know what that's about. Okay. Fuel metering force. Fuel metering force is air. Oh, I know what I was going to do. I had this brilliant idea. All right. Okay. See how well I do with this. So what have we learned so far? Well, we have, right, this is the way I do it. So, all right.
At least 80% of your drawing, right?
You just have to flip the floor.
I know, I just had to flip this. Not sure where to put the, all right, down, in, over. I'll put it right here. There we go. Put the needle. Float. Fulcrum. Seat. And just for lack of a better place to put it, we'll put the strainer kind of right in somewhere in line here. That'll be fine. All right. Fuel comes in. Finds its level. All right, at some point, you are going to have to set your float. The Stromburg is the most difficult one to do that with because you actually add shims underneath the seat. And so think it through a little bit here. If I wanted the float level to go down, it's too high. What do I need to do?
Add shims.
All right, so if we add shims to this, if we raise the seat up, it will close off sooner. So we add shims to lower the fuel level. We take away shims to raise the fuel level. Now you will be measuring the fuel level in your Stromburg, and there's a little trick to it. Remember we talked about meniscus, and so the fuel really kind of rides up the bowl like that. So near the edges, you can't measure it near the edge. And so what you do is you're going to use a depth micrometer, and you're going to find a spot not near the edge, away from the edge, away from other things, and you are going to put the depth micrometer across this, and you're going to lower the needle on the depth micrometer, and you bring it down, you bring it down, you bring it down, and you watch it with the light, and suddenly, all of a sudden, whoop, the fuel just jumps up on it. I mean, it's like an eighth of an inch up on the thing. I'm like, what just happened? Well, as soon as you brought it down and just got to the fuel, touched it, all the fuel just ran up on it. Stop. That's your spot right there. And that's what you're going to measure. Now, I'll tell you now, and you'll forget later, some of you, that make it easy. If the fuel was supposed to be if the float level is supposed to be 1 inch, and you got 1 1/8, is your fuel level too high or too low?
Too low.
It's too low. You took longer to measure it. So it's too low. So what do you do with the seat?
Take off the shims.
See how it gets low? Yeah, this goes up, that goes down. So we want the fuel level to go, we need it to go up. So if we need it to go up, because we got 1 1/8, and it should have been 1 inch, and by the way, those are not the right numbers by a long shot. So if we, sorry, I don't want to say it backwards. Should be 1, it's 1 1/8. Fuel level's too low. We need to raise it, which means we need to not shut it off so soon, which means we would drop the seat a little bit. So seat down means fuel level up. And conversely, if we measured it and it was, 7/8 of an inch, then it is the fuel level is too high, and so we have to,
Lower it,
Add shims.
lower the level.
we need to lower the level, and so to lower the level, it's not turning off on time, so we add some shims here. Follow? You have that written down and stuff, so it's going to be there, but you got to think it through. And I'm telling you, I'm going to go back to the first problem, and that is most people, if they get more than what it's supposed to be, they go, oh, the fuel level must be too high. I'm like, no, it's down, it's too low. So stick with that and you'll be fine. Okay. Fuel then comes out over to the discharge nozzle. Let me get over here. That looks better. There we go. So our fuel level is going to kind of find its own and be right the same across. So there's our fuel level. If we shut off the aircraft and we notice we have a blue stain on the floor every time we've shut off the aircraft, what is that telling us?
Fuel's too high.
All right, if the fuel level with the airplane off is too high in the float bowl, what will it be here?
Swing out.
Will it be higher or lower here?
Higher.
If I raise this, it's just going to find its own level, and then it's a little bit higher, and then what does it do when it's going to drip out? So you're not going to see a wet stain, probably. You're going to see a blue stain. The fuel evaporates, leaving behind the blue dye. So That's very common with Strombergs, actually. They just leak anyway. They do. The needle and seat leak, and so it slowly starts filling up, and then it starts dripping out over here anyway. So airplanes with these carburetors, we shut the fuel off when we're not using the airplane. All right, so we got the main discharge nozzle over here, and oops, there we go, with the little holes in it. And right there we have a little item, and that is the,
Which one?
Metering valve.
right there,
Main.
main
Metering valve.
metering
Jet.
jet. Not a valve, main metering jet. All right. Difference in air pressure between the top of the, put that little hole right there. Difference in air pressure between here on top of the fuel and over here where the is the Venturi is known as the fuel metering force. And the air pressure here in the Venturi, we could call that the what would we call the air pressure here in just the Venturi?
Low pressure.
Air metering force. So I'm gonna call it. So air metering force. All right. Up top, we now have a right here throttle valve, which controls what? Controls directly the amount of air going into the engine. Indirectly, it would control the fuel because it's the air flowing through the Venturi is going to be dependent upon that. So, all right, where am I at here? Main. Ah, yes, of course. But we have some problems here. Would this carburetor work? Why not? That's what I was thinking, but it would work. So without the main air bleed, it does tend to work, not as well. You can look at it a couple different ways. I've heard. So what's going to happen without the main air bleed? Number one, we have a lot of surface tension. And then it doesn't want to let the fuel flow out nice and easy. It kind of wants to stick around in here. It doesn't want to come out these holes. And when it does come out, it wants to come out in larger globules, if you will, larger balls of fuel. Well, one of the problems with a larger ball of fuel is it has less surface area. And I read something that said, oh, it's going to run lean, but it seems like it always runs rich and you get black smoke. Black smoke is lean, so I'm going to go with that. But anyway, so we got to get some sort of air bleed in here so that we have little tiny bubbles mixed in here so the fuel flows out nice and easy. So, all right, so we're going to just drill a little hole right in here. We got to bring this up past where the fuel is. Because when this is off and it's in the idle circuit, this is going to be full of fuel while it's idling. So that's
fuel.
when it's not running, yes. When the engine's off or if it's in the idle circuit, that will actually be full of fuel.
Okay.
Because nothing's flowing through here.
Makes sense.
But we're going to make it run.
So why does that have to sit higher? Yeah.
Because if it sat lower,
Oh, okay. They would, yeah.
if it sat lower, then the fuel would come up this way and just run out on the ground. So we can't have that.
Gotcha.
It's got to be taller.
Yeah, because all fuel is going to equal out.
All fuel is going to equal out. Well, while it's running, of course, look at trust yellow, never looks good. Works. When it's running, we got air coming in through here and mixing here with the fuel. And so now we have emulsified our fuel. Emulsification, which will help it come out of the discharge nozzle smoothly And in small droplets have more surface area. More surface area of the droplets means it's more likely to evaporate. I should say evaporate. Vaporize is the word I wanted, thank you. But we have to control how much of this air. We just can't have an open pipe, so we gotta put a little restriction right there. So that is called the oops, let's go over here. Main air bleed. Main air bleed discharge jet nozzle. Main air bleed.
Sounds good.
All right, main air bleed.
Where does the air enter the main air bleed?
Well, it can various places. On the Stromburg, it is actually placed in a nice little strategic spot that's kind of cool. If you follow where the air goes, the air actually has to go up, hit a plate, make a 90-degree turn, and go back down. To me, that's kind of a built-in little filter. So if a piece of dirt went up and hit that, probably would fall back the other way instead of making the turn and down in. Vho knows? Maybe they did it that way, maybe they didn't. But it's hidden in there. Marble Scheblers, they're going to pull the air bleed behind the venturi, kind of like I've done it. So it's always in an area that is not ram air, per se. Ram air is air that's being forced into it from the forward movement of the aircraft. It's never in a vacuum, because then it would suck the fuel out. So they try and always put it in an area that is undisturbed air. Yeah.
Backing up just a little bit, on the float pivot, are those always between the needle and seat and float, or is there some carburetors with the pivot all the way out?
They can be very different places. I just happen to be drawing more of a Stromburg right now. The Marvel Scheblers are all the way at the other end. And they're going to look more like automotive, where the pin is here, and then the needle, and the floats are way out here. All right, main air bleed. I was going to write stuff about main air bleed. Let's see, main air bleed. Main air bleed helps break surface tension of liquid fuel. Helps lift the fuel to the discharge point. Helps provide a more uniform mixture of fuel and air. Creates more surface area of fuel for faster evaporation. Oops, creates. Didn't want to write that. More surface area. Surface area of fuel droplets. For faster, I don't want to use evaporation. What was the word I wanted? Vaporization. Yeah, I like that. I'm going to go vaporization. Okay, if air bleed is too small, what happens? All right, look at our drawing.
Big droplets.
Okay, block off the air bleed. It is going to run right. Why is it going to run rich?
Because
Globules are larger.
It's 100%.
it's going to be more fuel than.
Correct. And you're right, and I was going this way. I think this is the easier way to remember it. The suction here in the venturi is acting upon two things in the drawing. Fuel and air. And so if we block off the air and it's just fuel, then it's going to be all fuel. Too much fuel, because it's supposed to be fuel and air coming out. A little bit of air, more fuel. So if we block it off, all that suction acts on the fuel. It's going to run way too rich. Let's see. If it is too large, the engine will then run lean because it's getting too much air. Okay. Too small, it's going to run rich. If it's too large, it'll run lean. All right, had the main metering jet. Calibrated orifice. We're going to say that a lot. Calibrated orifice. It means it's a restriction that they thought about. It wasn't just random. So calibrated orifice. Calibrated orifice that meters fuel accurately. Accurately, well, based on the pressure difference between the fuel, accurately based on fuel metering force. And I got float mechanism. So the Stromburg, like I said, those are boogers to set up. They really are. Because you're going to do it, and I'll give you a demo in the lab, the first person that's ready, and I'll kind of show you guys how to do it. So you have a certain head pressure, which means you have a tank X number of inches or feet above the carburetor, and you're going to turn it on. The fuel goes in. You got to have it perfectly level, and the fuel's going to come in, and it's going to stop. And then it's going to go up real slow because of the leak between the needle and the seat. So you got to take it really fast. You take a reading, and you dump all the fuel out, level it up again, do it one more time. Then you dump it out, and you do it one more time. You take 3 readings, take the average of the 3. Hopefully they're all 3 about the same. If one of them's an outlier, then do it one more time. Outlier meaning very different than the other ones. So you're going to check it, and then we've already talked about how now you've got to take out the needle outside the seat, and you got to add shims, take away shims. There's a formula that I'm not going to tell you right now. It's 5 to 1, and so you're going to figure it out, and you're not actually going to change out the shims. You're just going to tell me, in a perfect world, what you would do. I would add a shim exactly this big or that. Well, of course, shims don't come in every single size imaginable, so it takes a while to get the right shims, just like you had to with the magnetos, getting the right shims. All right, imagine that now with liquid that keeps. All right, so you don't have to do that. You're just going to report back to me. This is the fuel level. This is what I would need as a shim. I'm telling you now. Don't spend a lot of time going through the book, going, okay, so there's this shim is available. Just tell me what shim you want in a perfect world. I have a 3D printer that prints every single shim imaginable in every single dimension you could ever want in your entire life. So just tell me, I'll print it and hand it to you, and there you go. All right, so then you set that all up. Now on the Marvels, it kind of cracks me up. So you have this extreme precision over here. And then you get to the Marvels, which are a much better carburetor. I shouldn't say much better. They're just very different. And you just take it and you turn it upside down and you run a drill bit. You have to have the gasket on. You just take a drill bit. And the drill bit should touch the float near the end because they're kind of rounded. You're like, There you go. Put it together, put a tube on it, measure the float. If it's right, good. Have a good day. If it's not, you bend this little tab, and there you go. So no parts needed. Float mechanism. What's that?
The go, no go gauge, really.
I know, you just bend the little tab and try it again. But you have to be very careful not to put any pressure on the needle because they're a little rubber and you're trying to bend this little tab and it's easy to put pressure on the needle. In fact, and you don't want to take the seat out of a Stromburg. Let me say it again. You don't want to take the seat out of a Marvel Schebler because they're a pain in the butt. You have a minimum driving torque and you barely ever achieve it. And so now if it doesn't, there's a little stripe of nylon, so it's self-locking. The seat, when you screw it in, you have to have like 5 inch-pounds when you put it in, and you usually only get like 4 7/8 pounds as you're going, because it's just. And if it doesn't meet it, you got to throw out the seat and put a new seat in. So you're buying seats every time you take one out, so it's expensive. So all right, controls the flow, controls the level. Didn't I already write this? I feel like I did. Controls the
Float chamber.
oh yeah, float chamber. Controls the level of fuel in the bowl. In the bowl, level must be maintained. Exactly as it says in the book, but ideally it should be maintained where?
Same level as the main discharge
The
nozzle.
main discharge nozzle.
What about the main discharge nozzle?
Lower than
Slightly lower than the main discharge nozzle, or slightly lower than the outlet of the main discharge nozzle. All right, obviously that's going to contain, I'll put that, contains the float, needle, and the seat. I was thinking, oh, I wish I had. We're going to get into certain things. Things you should know that will help your life out. That's a Venturi. That's a two-piece Venturi. A lot of you are going to ask me, what is a two-piece Venturi? It's one that comes apart like that. And they went into these carburetors. These fell off and got sucked into the engine. And airplanes quit running and people died. So they made it so that you had to have a one piece where this and that piece that's still pressed in there don't come apart. They're welded together. And Marvel Schebler had a lot of problems with those. They did not want to run very well after that. All kinds of problems. Talk about later. These type of floats, like I said on the Marvel, this is the top of a Marvel Schebler. And bowl's down here. Just take it off, and that's stuck right there. That's why you can't check the float level, because here's the bowl and here's this. Won't turn off. So you just turn it upside down and use a drill bit under there, and you go, it should be about near the end of the floats. So Marvel went through a lot of different floats. This is my memory. They had these little tiny brass ones. They're so thin and lightweight, and sometimes they would get little holes in the solder joint, and over time they would leak, and fill full of fuel. And if they fill full of fuel, they will sink, leaving it open. And this has the needle up here. So when this drops down, the needle's up here, falls out of the seat, and so it will flood the engine and stop running. So they had this idea, we should use these composite things. Well, something was wrong, and they decided this wasn't working, and I don't remember what it was. It came apart or something, or they would fill and sink. So they had a better idea. They said we should use these. So these had a problem, and that the solder would sometimes come loose and get little pinholes that they couldn't detect, and in service they would sink. So they said, well, we have a better idea. We should use these things. Well, the problem with these things are
There's liquid in it.
there you go. Can you see that? This way. Fuel gets in there and they sink. So I don't have the new style. So they said, we should use blue epoxy. So now they use these blue epoxy, which I have a video or something. If you haven't seen it, it's pretty amazing. You could park a truck on them or something. It was on a webinar for some training with Marvel Schebler, and they were talking about these new blue floats, and they said they're just so incredible. They're so happy with them that they're even found a few of them where one of the floats had broken off, and they worked perfectly well with one half of a float. They said they took it apart like, holy crap. And they called the customer and like, oh no, the thing was running just fantastic. Hated to send it in, But it was time for the engine overhaul. We knew we should do it. So had a lot of problems with seats. This is Delrin. Something was going on with these. I don't remember. We had seats with rubber tips, and then they changed fuel, and the rubber tips would swell. Then they had Delrin, and there was a problem with Delrin's plastics. They got rid of that. Then they went to a metal one. So all different kinds of things. So all right.
Delrin doesn't do well with fluid.
Is that what it is? Yeah. And I think that might
Because they
be,
use a lot of Delrin in high pressure air systems, and they work fantastic.
but not fluid.
Not fluid.
Yeah, they should try it.
It's good for AR bushings.
So anyway, that's the thing there. While I'm thinking about it, this is a hard one. It's totally off topic, but it's relevant. I'm going to ask you to, when you're working on the Marvel Sheblers, that you have to do something with airworthiness directives. I don't make you research airworthiness directives. I give them all to you and say you have to verify that these airworthiness directives have been done to this carburetor. Because like I've said before, it's one thing if you have an airplane together, a carburetor bolted onto an aircraft, and you as a mechanic look at it and go, all right, this AD is due, and it's, black plate this or serial number that. You look at it, you go, okay, that doesn't apply. That's one thing. And you can get away with that. It's a whole nother thing if you've got it all apart on your table and you're just looking to serial, it says it doesn't apply by this serial number. And don't give me that, because you're now responsible for every single part that is inside of that. You will never, I'm not an attorney, but I don't think you will ever win an argument in court that says, yeah, but it had the V stamped on it, so it meant it didn't apply. Well, what did the AD ask for? To see if it was a two-piece Venturi. You had it apart. Could you not see that? I could. Then why did you sign it off and these people died? Well, because it had the V. You're not going to win that one. So when it's apart, you're responsible. So far everybody's done great. Ask questions if you don't know, because this is one of those things where confirmation bias will bite you hard. You know what that means? That you read it and you're trying to make what it says match what you see.
What you think,
Yeah, it's like this has to be that, and well, we've already covered a lot of examples about that. One of the things that's going to be very tricky for you is they add things in like spot faced and milled flat. So that's a tricky thing. And what that means is something that has been spot faced, this. See how this is all cast like that, but then that spot right there is flat where the screw goes? Okay, they spot face that. It's a circular cutting wheel on like a drill press, if you will. It's a mill. And they can just bring it down and they just touch that and bring it up. Yeah, they spot faced it. Spot face. and that's for a screw or something to sit. Or they could actually run that same cutter down and then run it all the way across. That's milled flat. This has been milled flat. Basically, they took the same cutter, spot faced, and said, now we'll just go all the way around, make it nice and flat. So that has been milled flat. That has been spot faced. One circle versus the whole thing.
Those are some terminology we'll see on the ADs.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
All right, break of time.
Break.